Welcome, everyone. This is a part of our ongoing series that we love to do around education, around all sorts of subjects. But tonight we are really dialing in around the triathlon focus and how do you effectively get ready as a time-starved athlete, our particular sweet spot that we love to help in this training budget about 8 to 14 hours a week. And the reason it's pretty broad there is because if you're more of a half Ironman athlete, that's 8 to 10, maybe 8 to 12 hours a week. Ironman athletes do need to do a little bit more around 10 to 14 hours a week. So there's our spread as we talk about this topic today. And we are going to get through three things tonight. And it's going to be, I think, hopefully empowering, informative. I know that we've got a lot of coaches signed up for this, and I'm excited to welcome you guys. I hope that it's interesting for you, perhaps provides a little bit of perspective. And also we've got a whole group of athletes, both on the higher end, as well as I saw some names that are people that are aspirational that I know have never done any of these distances. So hopefully this can be helpful and can help ensure that you can pave a good journey for yourself in the sport. We want to go through three things here. The first is to actually have a little bit of perspective around let's call it the traditional approach, and why that traditional middle of the bell curve approach really doesn't work for athletes that are particularly time starved. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And I want to rip that apart from my perspective. And then we want to go into understanding our challenge as time-starved athletes. And I call it the optimization challenge. That will reveal itself as we go through the session, but really empowering you to go on the optimization challenge. And then I think what a lot of folks are here for is, okay, give me the nuts and bolts. And I think more than any other webinar I've done, I'm really looking to break down the step-by-step of how, as a coach and as a partnership with athletes or groups of athletes, I try and think through and practically apply training and everything that supports training within the chaos of this thing called life. So we are going to go and get through three things today. I'm dedicated to make sure that I finish with 5 or 10 minutes before the top of the hour so that we can have time for questions before we get there. Now, before we dive into the meat and potatoes, as I like to call it, I think there's an important grounding that we have to go through, which is why this subject, and why did I and we at Purple Patch really want to focus on this subject right now? The truth is that as I look around, in fact, when I started Purple Patch years ago, I started as a coach, really from my own lessons as a failed professional athlete in many ways, because I trained myself into the ground. And when I looked around at that time, I saw so many athletes training their behinds off and not yielding the performance gains that their effort would put in. Fast forward now, I think there have been some gains, but I still think that there is a lot of confusion and a lot of challenge for coaches and athletes trying to help athletes excel in this longer distance triathlon while thriving in life. And there are so many people that struggle, that are dedicating and committed to their journey, and yet it ends up becoming a part-time job, a monkey on the back, evaporation of enjoyment, one and done of these events. And it doesn't have to be like that, and it shouldn't be like that. So my hope of really tackling this subject is to try and help you and ultimately the triathlon world take a shift in perspective where we can be successful. And so I hope that these sessions and this session tonight does start that journey a little bit, as we've been going on this journey for quite some time now. And so I hope that it's helpful, and I hope that the perspective is enjoyable, but also inspirational for you to perhaps think about evolving the way that you go about this sport. Now, I do want to focus as well, whenever we do sessions like this, we are always inundated after the session with fantastic, but now what? Or I've got a whole bunch of questions and I didn't get to ask my question. There are a few things that will come out of tonight's session. The first is we're going to send the recording We've also put together a really nice blueprint, which is kind of a summary of the information that you saw tonight. I think that's going to be very helpful. But also, if you would like to have a conversation, if you have further questions, feel free to email us, info@purplepatchfitness.com. We'd be delighted to set up a brief phone call to try and help you out with anything around your training needs. If you're a coach, you can do the same. It's absolutely welcome. Whether it's email, whether it's a conversation, feel free. We're happy to follow up and try and help you on your journey as much as you possibly can. Let's start tonight with one of my athletes who's a wonderful guy. And in honesty, I could have picked one of 15 or 20 athletes over the last 3 or 4 years that have won an overall event at an Ironman or Ironman 70.3 as an overall amateur while having a really busy, time-starved life. In fact, just last weekend, Sarah Camato, one of our athletes, won the overall title as an amateur at the Hawaii 70.3, training on 10 hours a week. And she's very busy, mother of 2, working full-time. But I chose Dirk. And so really as a litmus here, and this is Dirk winning Ironman Santa Rosa. That event actually doesn't occur anymore, but Ironman Santa Rosa, wonderful performance. This season, Dirk went on to become the 4th amateur. By my memory, I think it was the 4th amateur at the Hawaii Ironman World Championships. And great, bully for us. We've got an athlete that aspires and does very well and podiums and excels. But the important reason that I highlight Dirk celebrating his victory, as we deserve to celebrate his victory here, is that Dirk also has a really busy life. And he's an executive at Google. He's got a family with 2 children. And when I look at this picture now, this defines, and as we go into tonight's session, I want us to unite on what success is. Because if you're a time-starved athlete, I think that the lens that you need to look through in order for you to have longevity of this sport, to get the results that you want, but also be able to accelerate and thrive in the other areas of your life. And I want you to keep that in mind today, because as I coached Dirk, it wasn't about winning Ironman Santa Rosa. It wasn't about becoming one of the top finishers in Hawaii. It was about him becoming the best athlete that he could be, but without the expense of him as a busy professional, him as a father and a partner. And that becomes really important. And so performance to me in a time-starved life is, yes, have goals, achieve those goals. That's super. But also ensure that by going on that journey, you elevate the other aspects of your life. And so I want you to keep this image in mind as we go through the nuts and bolts of what we talk about today, because I tell you, it is possible. It's why we've qualified hundreds of athletes to world championships. It's why we've had several world champions, some of which have been CEOs, busy running companies while doing it. It is absolutely possible, but it takes a very brave approach. Luckily, it's relatively simple. So part 1, let's talk about the traditional approach and what's wrong with this. I talked about that little diagram that I put out there. We've got 3 almost pillars of your life, little components of your life. You've got something that's very important, your goals in triathlon, Ironman or Ironman 70.3. Doesn't matter whether you're trying to podium, win a world championship or cross the finish line. It doesn't matter. Sport is important to you. Goal-driven, critical. At the same time, you have your life. Many people here have families. It doesn't matter whether you don't have a family, but that whole area of life, being a social participant in your social network, and of course, work. And under work, we can include parenting as well, obviously. So why does the traditional or common used practices not really work very well? What are some of the areas that we unpeel that are common mistakes in many ways? The first is that almost every piece of education that I see around training, any program that is built, I constantly see and cover my eyes at how training for this sport is built and designed and analyzed in a vacuum. In other words, what do I need to do? What's the magic program? How many hours do I have to do to be successful at half Ironman or Ironman? And that absolutely collapses, because what you're aiming to do is to build a program that works for those three areas that we line up on the right side of the screen there. And so it's impossible to build a training program in a vacuum. So you, as a time-starved athlete, you have to have a broader perspective. You have to think about all aspects of life. That's going to become particularly relevant when we think about stress, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. What ends up happening with that mindset, and the most common, oh, I need to do 20 hours a week to get ready for an Ironman, otherwise I can't possibly be prepared. What ends up happening with athletes is they chase hours that practically, logically, they don't have, that their body cannot absorb. But either their neighbor or their coach or what they read in the magazine says, to be successful, you need to do 15 to 16 hours, 20 to 25 hours. Goodness me, if Gustav Eden and Christian Blumenfeld train 30 to 40 hours, I have to do at least 20 to 30, otherwise I'm going to fail. And you end up chasing hours that you don't have without consequence, because you can't beat physiology. And so that leads us to having a little bit more of a pragmatic lens. Another big mistake that I see coaches make, particularly, and athletes that are self-coaching, is looking at any given week of training and thinking, okay, I've got 7 days in this week, and I have to fill those 7 days with every element of training that is going to prepare me for my race. So what have I got there? I've got my long ride. So I do that on a Saturday. Good. So every ride, that's going to take up all of Saturday morning. I've got my long run as well. That's important. I've got to do that. I've got to do my over distance swim. That's important. Oh, I've got to do intervals. That becomes important. When am I going to do my track session? Tuesday. What about Thursday? Oh, that's my bike intervals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Cramming every type of training into a single week and then rinse and repeating. And athletes wonder why there's an accumulation of mental and physical fatigue. It's a real mistake. And many coaches will prescribe that. Many athletes will adhere to that. But underneath, there is a reservoir of fatigue. And that's why I think a primary reason that we see so many athletes getting very, very fit, but showing up tired. And so that approach just isn't going to work, particularly when you've got life, living and breathing. Dovetailing on from that, another big mistake is really spawning off of one of my favorite sayings at Purple Patch: life is not a spreadsheet. We can plan, and you should plan, but as soon as you have a rigid training program where the success is built on the micro level, day to day, checking the box, did I do it or did I not? Was it a good day or a bad day? And having that been the bellwether of passing or failing, that is going to lead to problems when you are managing within the institutions of the big areas of life. And so that pass-fail planning of taking a training program, it doesn't matter whether it's a wonderful week of training, and having every session completion being your barometer of success, it's not going to work, because we are doing it within the constraints of life. This one is important. I wanted to bring up because it's prevalent to the time that we're in right now. If you happen to be on social media, and I dance in those circles mostly for some information gathering and some interaction, etc. But suddenly this year, I've seen everything about something brand new in training, Zone 2, something that's been around since the beginning of endurance sports. But suddenly this year, this is the big hot topic, Zone 2. Now, whether you call it base training, lower intensity training that is conversational, building foundational fitness, it is a critical, important. Going easy in endurance sports is important. But what is starting to happen is people looking at a polarized approach. 90%, 80% of your training needs to be low intensity. And that's actually really quite true if you are training 20, 25, 30 hours a week. But if we compress time and you only have 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, it tends to be that if 80% of your training or 90% of your training is just easy zone 2, I don't see, through observation and years of doing this now, it's enough of a stimulus to actually prepare you for the demands. So if your window of training hours collapses, you have to have an evolved approach, and that will come out as we talk about today. The next big challenge with the traditional approach, so many people, and in fact, so many people that come to join Purple Patch, we have to do a lot of work, a lot of education with athletes to think, okay, I need to have this precision training that's going to count down every week where it starts 14 weeks or 20 weeks out of my race. And if I stray 1 week, 1 session off of that magical race build, that plan, and then I'm going to be a failure. The truth is, in a time-starved life, you actually have more capacity. The key success is building consistency over a lot of time with, yes, specific training, but we are not building athletes for an Olympic cycle. We're not building them for a track and field event. And within the chaos of life, the truth is, along with the level of the vast majority of time-starved athletes that are looking to improve, but are not at the very pointy end of the sport, you're going to have a much better set of results, and your training will be more enjoyable if yes, you do point your program towards key races, but you don't take a short-term lens to this. The better approach is to take a long-term lens, integrate it into your life in a sustainable way, and then point to a race. So if you are one of those athletes that shows up and starts training 20 weeks before a race and then takes a big break between and expects success, you're likely one of those athletes that is either frustrated, consistently injured, or not getting the results that you really want. And so short-term builds into any distance racing is not the solution, particularly for a time-starved race. The final component is this demand from coaches on focus, on being present. And this is something that's really important. Imagine if you're training 12 hours a week and you've got busy family commitments, you've got a lot of work, and that work takes a lot of your attention and focus. It's mentally draining, whether you have to sit through Zoom meetings, whether you have to be driving around in a squad car as a policeman, whatever it is, you've got a lot of focus there. And then your family and your relationships and your children, if you have them, take a lot of focus. If I, as a coach, or you as an athlete, expect of yourself, for those 12 hours that you're going to train, every single session, you should be present, you should be focused, you need to make sure you maximize everything out of it. Very quickly, that has become a part-time job. That's become an additional cognitive load. There isn't any pressure relief valve from life with your training. And that starts to create this overcapacity. And so, yes, focus is important, but you need to know when to show up. And that's what we'll unveil today. So what are some of the elements with time-starved training that we look for? Well, the first thing is take a long-term approach. If you can do this successfully, the magic word of time-starved athlete success, where we see people achieve remarkable personal things, doesn't matter whether it's body composition improvements, whether it's Dirk de Corvo winning overall amateur titles, it doesn't matter what it is, wherever you're at, seeing people transform and have consistent magical results, it is via consistency. Many, many months, even many, many years, where it is something that you do. In order to achieve that, the sport itself, the training itself cannot be weighted on your shoulders. It needs to be something almost habitual, integrated. And so that word integration and that word consistency, it's really, really important that you find that. And that informs a lot of the planning that we're going to get into. Success also comes about that by following and adhering and managing a training program, by doing that, the net result, of course, is that you are actually more healthy, more energetic. You actually get the sporting results, but also you can show up as a better person, a better leader, a better employee, whatever your vocation is in life. And that's a barometer. So if sport and you are committed to it, and it's great to be committed to it, but if it becomes a drain on your relationships, your energy, your health, and you're walking around in the fog of fatigue and having a hard time focusing, you are not nailing it as a time-starved athlete. And so what we are looking for in life is this thing that is sustainable. That's the quest that we're after. We want to get to sustainability. And on top of that, it actually, and this is an amazing license. In fact, this is for free tonight. You're allowed to have fun doing it. A lot of your training should be, yes, challenging, because challenge is important to create growth. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it can be enjoyable. But if you're walking around and feeling like it's a grind and a drag, and then there's something probably missing there in your recipe of performance. Similar to what I talked about, almost the counterpoint to what I talked about around focus, you're really nailing your training and the way that you're building your training program if you're getting two things out of it. The first is results in your sport. We want you to show up prepared, make sure that you can have your best personal performance on the day, etc. But on top of that, the training itself acts as a pressure release valve on life. It should be soul-filling. And that means that quite a bit of your training, even if it is 12 hours or 8 hours or 6 hours, you need to make sure there's capacity in there to have stuff that actually isn't overly focused, is a bit more free, is a little bit easier stress, so that you can get that therapeutic side, and that weaves into consistency, which becomes really important. Another component that is absolutely critical is your approach must equip you to manage the ebbs and flow of life. If you remember where I talked about the traditional sense of training, I said, life is not a spreadsheet. Life ebbs, and therefore you can probably train a little bit more in those times. Life flows. You might have a deadline at work, a lot of travel. You might have family commitments, potentially championship season for the swim and baseball teams, as I had last weekend with my 10-year-old Baxter. But if you've got a dynamic mindset and a program that can dance with those ebbs and flows, then you can weave consistency. But you must be equipped with the approach so that you can actually manage that. And so what comes out of those challenges and what comes out of success is a very, very important point. The message tonight is not less is more. That's one of my least favorite sayings when it comes to performance. It isn't about doing less. And it's not about hacking and trying to find an easier path. Anything that you value requires commitment and hard work. It requires discomfort. It's important. So this isn't about a call to action to do less. It isn't saying, hey, there's a better way and it's really easy and you never get tired. You do. What this is about is you finding your performance within the context of everything else that you have to deal with in life. And that's where we come onto the optimization challenge. So let's dig into this a little bit. Now let's start really simply. Let's think about training an athlete. Okay, so training is a stressor. It is a demand. And there's a picture of me being very nasty at a track session with a couple of our athletes. So I, as the coach, prescribe a demand. In this case, it's a track session. And it's very challenging. All right, ladies, go and do 10 800s very hard. Make it up. The session doesn't matter. But as a coach or your training program is delivering a prescription of a demand. Good. That's what we do in training. And the reason for that is designed to try and elicit a response, an adaptation, yeah? And so what we see there then is the athletes responding to that demand by going through discomfort. They're doing the training. That's the response. I'm executing the session as intended. So you need to understand what the session is. I'm executing it as intended. Good. And if that prescription is good and appropriate, the yield that you should gain as an athlete is adaptation. And that adaptation can make us fitter, stronger, more powerful, etc. It's a catalyst for growth. So we place a stressor, you do the work, it's uncomfortable, but we yield an adaptation. And when we do that over time, what ends up happening is we get performance improvements. And there's a picture of Tim Reed winning the world championship at Ironman 70.3 distance, 2016. It was a fun day. So the key for you building your own program, me prescribing as a coach, your coach prescribing to you, whoever it is to build a program that enables the absolute maximal positive adaptations. Your body will always adapt, but it can adapt through over fatigue, systemic shutdown, muscular injury, or it can get fitter, stronger, more powerful. So our goal is to absolutely maximize the training dose that we can prescribe while yielding positive adaptations. And we want to do that consistently, but we want to do it within the context of life. Okay, so that's really simple of what we're looking to do. Training is a specific stress. The challenge is that we all have to manage a whole bunch of stress in our life. We all walk around in life, and over the last couple of years, there's been a whole bunch of it, and there's still more of it now. And I call it the total stress accumulation. The body is very, very smart. What it's not very good is differentiating sources of stress, whether it's time zone travel with going from New York to London, whether it's financial stress, whether it's training stress, whether it's lack of sleep. Our total stressor accumulation is highly individual. And it's all based on our histories, our genetic makeup, our circumstances we find ourselves, and actually what we value. And that becomes really important. So what stresses Robert over here might be a really different accumulation of stress of what stresses Jill. But we all have to manage it. And you're not alone if you feel stressed in life. That's normal. But now what we're doing is integrating stress into life. So if you just think about stresses in your life, goodness me, before we think about anything else, there's a whole bunch we have to manage: sleep, financial, travel, nutrition, self-stress, and how we see ourselves in the world and where we're going, family. Let's talk about inflation, gas prices, the war in Ukraine, COVID, carry on. Yeah, there's a lot to manage. This strikes at the heart. These next three images is what we're looking to achieve. Here is what happens with the majority of athletes that I meet. You'll have a certain amount of accumulation of stress systemically from our personal life, our family, our travel, whatever it might be. And then whatever institutes work, professional triathletes, their work is training, so that becomes really reduced, hence they have a greater capacity to train, but we have work stress. And then because of the commitments in life and squeezing training in, there's often some really poor habits around sleep. A lot of executives that I start to work with have highly compromised sleep. Maybe poor habits around nutrition, eating on the go, not having time to eat properly, etc. And then what many athletes and coaches that are building programs in a vacuum say, now what I need to do is ram in this magical training program that includes 20 hours a week. And unfortunately, you can't beat physiology. This is why so many athletes are walking around systemically tired, underperforming on race day because they're fit and fatigued, consistently battling injury, on and on and on. Their existence, while their goals are important to them, life is hard to manage. And on top of it, the thing that they love, that they're ambitious about, just feels a grind. It evaporates fun. And so one of the things we can do here, look, we have certain non-negotiable commitments. We've got commitments in life with family, and I'm assuming that we all want to show up to our social circles, our family, etc. We don't want to dilute our performance in the workplace. That becomes important. We can say we want to prioritize sleep, but one of the things we can do is reduce training hours. So we can do that. So at the most basic level, don't do 20 hours, do 12 hours really well, and that's good. And if you do that, those 12 hours will likely be much more effective because you're not carrying around a bucket of fatigue, and you're actually giving your body systemically capacity to adapt because we're not overloaded with accumulated stress. And that's good. And that's sort of a simple level, but that's not enough, because the truth is, in fact, if you're a really busy executive that isn't exercising and you're trying to get somebody to exercise and have good habits, or as we are tonight talking about Ironman and half Ironman, Ironman 70.3 distance racing, what we're looking to do is build capacity to more. So now, if you have a slightly reduced number of training hours, but you do it in a really smart way, and on top of it, you adhere to really simple habits around nutrition, fueling, daily hydration, sleep, what ends up happening is your capacity increases. You're not diluting your hours that you're working or you're showing up for your family. You're doing slightly less training hours, but now you've got a greater capacity. And now, on any given week, as life flows, you actually have capacity to maintain training while maybe working more. Or you go away and trip with the family, you've got stuff with the family, you can increase your capacity. Or on a week-to-week basis, you can actually start to reintroduce more training hours. Because if your body can absorb more training, you should do more training, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of the other institutions of your life. And that's why we always talk about the 4 pillars of Purple Patch performance. And that is endurance training, strength training, nutrition, and recovery. That's the program. And that's how you build capacity, and you can actually get more effective training. So that is the optimization challenge. How do you go about building that? Well, that's what we want to dig into. Unfortunately, what happens right now, I thought, why don't I just throw this over the top? This is the imagery that I see of a typical triathlete. How many typical? 85 to 90% of triathletes out there. They're burning the candle at both ends. Let's change that. Let's take a smarter approach, a more pragmatic approach, where everything can work together. So how do we do it? Well, I guess I should jump ahead. I was ahead on the screen there. I do want to talk about a dynamic mindset and outcome on this a little bit, because this becomes really important. What is the outcome by adhering and adopting this mindset? What do you end up having? What is high performance built around? If you have an athlete that is getting their recipe right, where they have consistent training that's specific, where they're yielding improvements, they end up becoming really adaptable, moldable, and resilient human beings. I much prefer the phrase or the word anti-fragile to resilient. It's not a wood table, but it's this plastic moldable athlete that can mentally and physically retain perspective, take on load, and manage through adversity. Because in a time-starved life, when you're training for something, it's never going to be perfect. You are going to have roadblocks. You are going to have setbacks. You are going to have adversity, whether it's sickness or whether it's logistical barriers and commitments, whatever it is. Your journey to being an Ironman or an Ironman 70.3 effective time-starved athlete is going to include challenge. It's really hard, but you're equipped to do it because you're an adaptation machine. But the outcome, when you adopt this, this is where it becomes potent, is where you are equipped to absolutely manage and thrive when it gets tough. So it's not going to be easy. We're not looking for utopia here. What I'm looking for is to build a mindset and approach where you can manage through adversity. You won't crack. You don't want you to crack, okay? The mission is to develop into that adaptive athlete, and that becomes important. And so you do that by taking on a dynamic mindset, something that we'll talk about. You take a long-term lens, you consistently retain perspective. This is going to become really important, and you build your toolkit. Now, I think the third section is why you're all here. Great, I'm on board. This all sounds lovely. but how in the heck do I do it? How do I actually put this? So let's really get to some nuts and bolts. Let's talk about plotting your training. Now, I hope that you've got your spectacles on here, because there's some images and graphs that I'm going to need to showcase a little bit. It becomes really, really important. The first is understanding, great, on an image basis, I understand stress accumulating, etc. But how do I know how many training hours I have? There's a very simple process that we do here, and we do it in 2 phases that will become apparent. Rather than saying, this is my training program, how do I integrate it into a life? I like athletes to come from the bottom up. So the first thing that we do is, okay, let's get a landscape of your life. What are the commitments that you have in life? Now, this can be everything from work, maybe big trips that are planned, family commitments, perhaps you coach Johnny's soccer team, whatever it is. But let's really plot those in a practical. Let's have a little calendar, let's plot them out, and let's look at the typical week. What are your commitments in life? That's super. That becomes really important. Let's really break down your work commitments alongside of it, as I mentioned. So when are the key meetings that you always have? What hours do you typically need to be in the office or be in the office at home nowadays, whatever it might be? But start to put in first what your fabric of your life is. The third component that is often missed, and it's missed, therefore people have higher aspirations and beliefs on what they've really got capacity of training for, is then to look at some of the supporting habits. Now I need to prioritize what good sleep is. When do I need to be in bed every night? How many hours do I need to get? When do I need to start to wind down? And also give myself a little bit of capacity for downtime, actually doing nothing, something that's really, really powerful for us as human beings, stepping away from life, work, sport, and actually having a little bit of relaxation. Goodness me, how do we weave that in there? But once you have gone through that very simple process, you now start to see, and I like to draw it out with a pencil and paper, you start to see your true availability. When do I have on a typical basis the number of hours? And for most of us, it's 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, 10, 11, 12 hours. I don't know anyone that's got a really busy work schedule, life schedule, family, friend schedule that has 20 hours a week consistently on a basis. And that becomes your optimization challenge. And it's not what Johnny does or Jill does or Jenny does. It's what's right for you. Each of us has our unique bucket of total stress accumulation. And with the hours that you have for Dirt de Corva that we talked about, it was around 12 to 14 hours a week on a typical week. That now, how do I optimize training within that window? You go through this exercise as a first planning, perhaps planning each phase of training. What do the coming months look like? And then you do it every single week. And it should take 10 to 15 minutes. We call it the Sunday special. And it looks to go ahead and say, what's happening this week? And that's where you start to create a system of management. You start to think about, okay, on this week, and it sounds so basic, but it's so important. We have our pros do it. We have our CEOs do it. Let's have a look at what it is. And it gives you 2 things. The first is perspective. What's coming up in my week? I'm going to move into execution mode. Secondly, an understanding of looking at your week of training ahead and saying, I need to make decisions. Wow, I've got more time. Maybe I can upfill my training because my family's away, or I've got a couple of days off of work, whatever it might be. Or goodness me, I've got a trip coming up. How do I maintain the specificity of this week while reducing training load through either reducing sessions or removing some of the intensity of sessions? And if you do that, you're step 1 of the way of creating consistency. Great. The second element. Now, this is Monday through Friday. This is theoretically a morning session and an evening session. We haven't got swim, bike, and running here because I didn't want athletes to, or you guys to start, the audience to start thinking, oh, he's put a swim next to a bike. But the gold labels here in the upper plan or the upper image here are workouts: swim, bike, run, strength. This top image is what many athletes' training programs look like. And I call it chicken casserole. The individual sessions might look good, but it's all just mixed up. Every session has the same prioritization. What happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that's why athletes get into a check the box mentality. Goodness me, 9 workouts were prescribed here. I only did 8. I must have failed. With a dynamic mindset, you want to create a very high or strong hierarchy of workouts. You have the key sessions, which are the ones that are really designed to move the performance needle. Swim, bike, and run, they can be either very high intensity or they could be longer duration workouts or a combination of both. But they're the ones that you have to be focused for. They're the ones that you want to be present. They're the ones that you want to be able to execute as intended really well. And then you have the supporting workouts. So those are the blue sessions in the lower image. Monday, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, Friday, Sunday. Those are the sessions that what we call supporting. Those are there that are really important. They're nice to have, but they're kind of the Amazon pack filler. Your brand new vacuum cleaner will be broken if it's not there, but they're not actually the key core part of the product. And so those are there for maybe some technical development, some recovery, some preparing for a key session, or just general endurance. And those are the sessions that are your management tool. You can reduce intensity. You can actually go for a run that's more soul-filling. Perhaps you listen to a podcast or an audio book, or you just like to be out in the trees. But they are generally lower intensity. And if life flows and gets really busy, you can reduce any intensity in those sessions or remove them. So if Wednesday in this example is a really busy day and you only have time for a single session, you would do the key workout. Sunday the same. You would do in that gold workout the second, and you would skip or reduce or scale. And you retain consistency. Of course, that means that the barometer of success is not over the dynamic mindset. I checked off every box. I did X hours. Because in a single week, you might do 8 hours of really effective training because life was flowing and really busy. And in another week, you might have a couple of days off work and you might do 14 hours of really effective training. And that's great. But over the course of many, many weeks and months, you create consistency of positive adaptations of training. So that becomes really valuable as a mindset. Now, how we build that into a training cycle, because we want athletes to actually have a rhythm and an understanding of progression and familiarity. You might remember earlier I said, don't try and squeeze every single type of workout into every single week. So in order to do that, we need to broaden the perspective a little bit. So I tend to like athletes to move in 3-week cycles of training. Week 1, we'll have 2, 3, or 4. In this case, we have 4 key workouts. And don't worry about the zone stuff. It's just riding is higher intensity. And then the Thursday is stronger. That might be bigger gear work that we tend to do. Then we're doing low intensity and we're doing some tempo type running. So that week has different elements of a training program. Week 2 then has a different shift. We have a little bit of recuperation, some lower stress training, and then we hit a harder weekend. And week 3 is what we call a transition week. And that transition week is a similar rhythm that you might expect on a race week. We have a little bit added recuperation. I'm labeled as the recovery coach. So the transition week is the end of the cycle, excuse me, to make sure that we can systemically absorb and recover from the training, get the adaptations, but also get the body familiar with the rhythm to then have a very challenging weekend, what we call a simulator, for example. And this 3-week block, 2 weeks of pretty challenging work, 1 week with rejuvenation being one goal and race prep and simulation or something challenging being the third goal, that's a block of work. And over the course of those 3 weeks, you want to be able to have all of the elements of training. And then what we do is we rinse and repeat and evolve that block of work. So straight away for a time-starved athlete, you come out and there's flex in that program. We might be adding sessions if life is ebbing a little bit and we have capacity. We might reduce total hours or total sessions if life is flowing. But overall, we're going to get to see and layer cycles of work over the course of a phase of training, of which then once we've done 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 4 cycles, then we might change the stimulus for the next block of work as we go through from the very start of the season, which we call postseason, through the build phase, through race-specific training to get you ready for this. So we think about building a session in 3-week cycles. Now, one of the questions you might have is, why not 3 weeks and then a week of recovery? Well, that's a great question for someone to ask, which I'm going to hold off on this. So if we look at it at a deeper level, what it might actually look like here is, this is a typical week of training. And this now has you as the time-starved athlete. You'll realize in here that there is more intensity than I'm just going to go zone 2 with 1 interval workout. The blue workouts are easier. They are soul-filling. In other words, they are lower stress. I demand less focus on those. They are really good for building tissue resilience. They're really good for building cardiovascular conditioning, but they are also ones that can be moderated if necessary. The key workouts are the ones that you want to be able to show up at your best and execute as intended. So we might have on Tuesday, random example, but some higher intensity with a very short, easy run off of it. On Thursday, we might go again and do some hill repetitions on the bicycle and maybe a more challenging short run off of it. Wow, that one beat me up. That's challenging. I might do some longer distance endurance riding, very smooth. And the reason it's key is because we're accumulating 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it might be, of endurance work there, with a little bit of a short 10, 15 minute, really sharp activation run speed workout. And then on Sunday, I might get a stronger swim in there with just a really smooth, soul-filling run that might be scaled. And so what you have there is a management tool, because you understand when you look at this week, hang on, my Thursday is really busy. I've got a dental appointment. They're going to numb up my mouth, and then I've got to go back to work. There's no way I can do a strong one. So I'm going to manage my week ahead of time and shift that to a Wednesday. I'm maybe going to shift the Tuesday session to a Monday, but you can still hit the key sessions, and maybe you're going to reduce or remove any of the intensity of the supporting sessions. So this is how it becomes key. So we start diving into the key components of training. Let's look at what it looks like over preparing for a race. So way down at the bottom there, 6 cycles. Now, if I had Anthony here, 6 times 3 is, if I do my calculations correct, 18 weeks of training. So let's imagine this is your last 18 weeks of training going into an Ironman or a half Ironman. Doesn't matter what distance it is. And you see that differentiated. So here is a nice graphical image of a 3-week cycle. Week 1, week 2, that 3rd week being in gold is a transition week where we want to absorb, adapt, and test our fueling with a bit of a simulator. And then we repeat that with week 1 again, week 2, transition. So that's week 4, 5, and 6. Then we repeat it again. And you see how we start to weave consistency, but an opportunity for a thread. So if you are getting ready for a half Ironman, you have 9 or 10 hours a week, or you're getting ready for an Ironman, you have 12 or 13 hours a week. A common question is, but surely I need to do some big over distance work. And that's true. That's true. If you really want to perform, there is some need to do some really over distance training. And if you are a busy executive, or if you've got a partner and you've got to collaborate where you're looking to integrate and still show up to your partner and your family, or showing up to the workplace, this is where planning comes in. And when you start to think about is, okay, over the next 18 weeks, and this might change a little bit, but how do I cluster little blocks of training? So let's use a case study. Imagine Dirk, and he's talking to his wife, and he says, look, I've got to get ready for this Ironman Santa Rosa. And here are the 18 weeks. I'm going to consistently be doing 12 to 14 hours a week. It enables me to show up to Google as an executive. I'm still going to be present. Not every weekend will I be missing in action every Saturday for 6 hours. But let's plot together. And so in this, the plots have said that weekend, that's Dirk's weekend. He's going to be gone Saturday morning, maybe part of Sunday. And that's going to be an Ironman focus. And then his wife can manage around it. Or flip side, doesn't matter, you know, I'm just using Dirk as an example, and I know his family very, very well. And so he goes through the block and starts to identify times that he can cluster and maybe do some over distance work. So as a consistent pipeline, he's doing his 10, 12, 14 hours a week, but he gets a few weeks periodically, every few weeks, that he's able to cluster training or maybe even attend a training camp as he used to do. Great. I get a little bit of time off work, or I'm going to work remotely, but I'm going to have some adjusted hours, and I'm going to go to the St. George training camp with Purple Patch in May or in September 15th timeframe, and I'm going to go and hit that. Great. You get that opportunity to go through, and suddenly you leverage that cluster of training opportunity to get the over distance. And in that week, you might do some more hours, 16, 18, 20 hours a week for Dirk. But you have to then give back to life the other components in the other weekends. And when you do that and you're systemically healthy, you're absorbing positive training over months, not over a constricted time frame. The reason this system really works beautifully as well is, let's take a random workout. Let's use that high intensity session that we do on a Tuesday. When you have a 3-week cycle and you repeat those workouts, the workouts become familiar. The first time you do that Tuesday bike workout, let's make it up, 6 by 5 minutes, very challenging at low cadence. You're going to see that workout again, perhaps evolved a little bit, but you're going to see it again, repeated or evolved in week 4, and then in week 7, and then in week 10 at the start of each cycle. And it might evolve a little bit, but in principle, it's going to be pretty much the same. And maybe that simulator that you're doing on that Saturday or Sunday of your transition week, where you're working on your fueling and it's highly race specific, you might not do it in that cluster of weekend of work that in Dirk's case, he prescribed for himself, but you might see it again and again. And what you start to have is a measurable insight into progress. You start to see how you're executing. It's not about doing more power. It's about nailing the sessions and starting to see the rhythm. By the time you're at the end of a phase of training, you change the stimulus and you begin again. In this case, by the time that we're down at that red race day, you are equipped, consistent. You can look back at your training and say, I see progress. I see how I managed. And that is what has got me ready. All of those workouts that we outline here, it's not the big session. It's not grinding out every Saturday. It's this fabric and all of the phases before that have got me prepared. And so how do you amplify it? How do you take the building blocks of this and absolutely maximize your predictability of high performance? There are 3 main things. In fact, there are 4. The first is coaching. Because the truth is that a coach or a coaching program is, yes, they prescribe training sessions. Yes, they deliver a plan. But the real benefit is having a coach or a group of coaches or a community that can help you stay on track, manage and course correct when the proverbial poop hits the fan. That's what the value of coaching or coaching programs are. And so I have to stand up as a coach and say, it's really difficult when you're in the weeds to actually make smart decisions. Education is important, empowerment of athletes is important, but someone having your back is critical. It's also really beneficial if you have accountability. And yes, a coach can deliver that, but accountability can go both ways. Having someone else to go on the journey, having people remotely that can join the journey with you, incredibly powerful. Accountability is important. And if you do that as a part of a community, in person or remotely, where you are tying together, it makes the journey more fun. You can share the suffering and you can learn. Using our Tuesday session there, we have video bike sessions. We have people all over the world that are participating in very similar or the same bike workout and having the water cooler effect of, goodness me, that was hard. That was really challenging. How did you do that? How did you manage that? That becomes a sense of belonging and a sense of learning. And that amplifies how you show up in these things. It becomes really important. And having this perspective, these cycles of training also enables you, the number one thing, to come out of the weeds, to pause and come up and reflect. Talking from the Sunday special that we talked about to having a roadmap that is dynamic. The key is that things can change and things can evolve. So this is just the principle, but on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, you have to manage this. So my last thing, guys, just very quick tips, the almost max bonus session, because I know that I promised I'd be done 8 minutes ago. So in the last 2 minutes, just a few quick tips around 3 key elements here. Your first, training. If you want to be a great time-starved athlete, run frequency. Everyone is obsessed with the long run. I think that's the most overrated part of training for an athlete. Yes, it's high value. I prefer long runs to be done on soft surface, but you might have seen in my program that we had a lot of run frequency. A lot of that is really easy. Some of it might be walking or include walk breaks, but it's about building tissue resilience and sliding under the radar. It reduces injury risk. It maximizes muscular resilience. Number 2, look as a time-starved athletes for opportunities to double up sessions. Doing a swim session and sneaking a little run afterwards. Doing a strength session and following it with a run. Leveraging bricks, not just to motor program the body to run off the bike, but to have a time-efficient way to integrate training in. The different ways of doing it where you can double up sessions, split apart sessions, even big bike workouts. Maybe you can do 3 hours of biking and 60 minutes on the trainer at night on a Saturday if you're time-starved. Doubling up becomes a really powerful tool in your toolbox. Remember, it's not about optimal, it's about optimizing within context. The cluster bomb approach, that's politically incorrect, but that's what I talked about with Dirk, managing and blocking out his training. And the tool that you have in your toolbox, while it is inconvenient for many people in a time-starved life, swimming and making a lot of your swimming high intensity. Might get questions around that, but high intensity swimming, the best bang for the buck, low stress on the musculoskeletal system, quick to recover from, an accelerator. So those are my quick tips around training. Habits. What are the habits? You need to fuel. So firstly, don't believe all the nonsense out there. Most of the elite athletes are not doing half of the nonsense that you read out there. Here's what you need to do as a time-starved athlete looking to maximize your energy in the workplace with your family and getting training adaptations from it. Number 1, fuel after every single session. 30-minute run, easy, fuel after it, protein and carbohydrate. Whole discussion for another day, but critical. Number 2, daily hydration, really important. Amplifies recovery, systemic health and immune system, and your ability to focus and process information. Fatigue in the day is often a symptom of, yes, maybe compromised sleep, but really commonly dehydration. Hydrate and hydrate consistently throughout the day. Number 3, make breakfast a priority. You need to feed your brain and your body for the day ahead. It also is a catalyst for better eating habits and choices throughout the rest of your day. And of course, prioritize sleep. Don't compromise sleep on a consistent basis over the course of training. Sometimes you've got to get up really early, but over a consistent chronic basis, make sure sleep is a part of your program, not just an afterthought or the first thing to go. And finally, management. As I talked about, looking at every week of training and knowing this is where I need to show up, be present and be focused, and understanding at other times, I'm going to have a pressure release valve of life. It's my easy soul-filling me time. I love to go on little short runs in the woods, listening to an audiobook, and I ain't thinking about technique, and that's okay for you. You show up and do the work on the hard stuff. You go soul-filling on the easy stuff. It's helpful. It's fun. It makes it more enjoyable in the big picture. It's valuable. make sure that every day of training, you optimize the day. So if it is a priority day and it's focused, it doesn't matter whether your power is less, you're having a tough day, maximize the day. It's not bad if your power was 20 watts lower than last week, or you're running at 30 seconds pace. It's just life. It's just training. And so maximize what you can, reflect on why you might have been fatigued, and then move on. Look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. This is one of the most important things you can say. And I hate it when coaches say, this is what I do. But over the last week, I've just felt systemically tired. And that's because I've been really busy in life. And so with my training, I am actually training for something at the moment. I just thought, you know what? I can't do the hard work right now. So I've stayed consistent, just removed all the intensity. I had to have a really honest, hard look in the mirror, just say, I can't do it right now. So what I'm going to do for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 days is I'm going to wait for my body to come back, and I'm going to shift my mindset to low intensity. And lo and behold, on Tuesday, boom, legs came back, feel great, back on it, back on the program. So you have to have that honest reflection as you go through this. And ultimately, with that in mind, how do you do that? Leverage that soul filler trump card. If life gets in the way and you're feeling systemically tired, I call it breathing the fumes. It feels like you're running on an exhaust fan and it's tired. Start the workout, do the workout. But if you are genuinely systemically tired, bring in the soul filler, remove the intensity and do it easy, even if it includes going for a walk, because typically something is better than nothing. Whew, that's a lot of content. And I hope that it's helpful. Of course, we're going to follow up with this because I know it's a meaty one, but my last question is really directly to you. And that's, are you brave enough? Are you brave enough to evolve? Because this, what I'm talking about here, takes a radical shift in mindset. But this is what we do at Purple Patch. This is how we coach. We try and help athletes not just follow a program, not just check the box, but take on a journey and make it fun and make it so that training is a part of life. And I think that's a big reason why so many people show up and say, I'm going to give it a crack. And guess what happens when you show up fresh and you've consistently been training? When you go and give it a crack and say, I'll see what happens, really good things can happen. And so I wish you the best of luck, but I think, Tiger, I'm happy to stay on. It's 6:05 right now, but I'm happy to stay on for 5 or 10 minutes with any questions that we might have.
Yes, we have. Okay, we've got 5 I'm going to go through here. So we'll do this as a teensy bit of a lightning round. The first question we've got is from Clark, who asks, when do I know when to push through fatigue or hold back? I love checking the boxes on my plan and getting the validation of hitting the workouts, but I have a really hard time skipping sessions.
Yeah, I think that the first thing, what you said there at the back end of that, Clark, I love checking the boxes and skipping the sessions. That's the first point, that almost what I talked about. You've got to pause and shift the mindset first. So you got to commit, and you got to commit for months and say, you know what, I'm going to give this a crack, because 99 times out of 100, when you're a box checker, people run into cul-de-sacs of fatigue. People are consistently injured or frustrated. So something has to change. So the first thing is perspective shift, and say, I'm going to be honest with myself. I'm going to manage it on a day-to-day basis. Then it's always that art, and it's not a science, the art of, do you push through fatigue or do you back off? Fatigue is a part of training. You're going to be tired. And quite often, your perception of fatigue is really different than your absolute physiological resource of what you have. And so this isn't a call to action to pull back every time you get a little tired, because that would be, well, pretty underwhelming. You'd spend more time on the couch than you would be active. But instead, the first question is this anticipated fatigue? So have I been training really consistently and it's the last day of a pretty hard 2-day block of work and my legs are sore and they're tired, but I've been training hard and I've been sleeping well and eating well and I feel fine, but I'm just tired. Keep going, push through. You've got recovery coming up. And you know what? If you start to, quote, fail in workouts so far as underperform, you can always pull back and give yourself a couple of days of recovery in there. And that's great. And typically that's embedded in the program. If you have an unanticipated fatigue, systemic fatigue, you are grossly underslept for one reason or another, you feel like you're on the verge of sickness, and you start the workout and it just doesn't improve at all. As you hit that tipping point where the blood's starting to circulate, you're starting to get the crack of sweat going, and you maybe try the first interval and you are empty emotionally and physically, then you have to ask yourself a question: am I going to yield anything positive from this? And if the honest answer is, and this improves, your perception of this improves as you become more adept at it, then it is better to say, I'm going to wait. I'm going to put in a soul-filling option. I'm going to reduce the duration. I'm going to remove all intensity. And now I'm going to come back and not throw my toys out of the cot, but now I'm going to look at the program and say, I need to give myself, just as I did the last few days, give myself a few days of a little bit of recuperation. And that becomes important. So I think it's how you respond, not react. And don't treat it like a failure if you do manage the program. That's why perspective and honesty is really, really important. There's a lot more there, but that's the answer so far.
All right, awesome. And then we have another one, it looks like from Bill, who wanted to know if you can shed a little light on what recovery should look like in this context, especially from a 70.3 or a full Ironman, and whether it is that affected by age. He's asking as somebody in their late 60s.
Yeah, recovery globally is, so firstly, with the mature athlete, it becomes, you have to spread out the hard sessions a little bit more because recovery is more important. And there is a greater prioritization on strength training. I think that's really, really important. And actually, interestingly, having at least 2 sessions that are really pretty high intensity, it becomes important. From a recovery standpoint, what that looks like, oxygenating the muscles, circulating blood from a physiological standpoint is better than doing nothing. Sometimes people need either practically, logistically, or emotionally a day where they just turn their back on the sport, and that's fine. And I actually allow athletes to do that all the time. But many athletes feel better and operate better if they do something. And so everything is very conversational, very easy, and just enough to circulate blood. But the mindset is not about training. It's about facilitating recovery. And so as you come out of a race, I think the specific question that coming out of an Ironman or a half Ironman, the recovery rate for any athlete, including mature athletes, is how much fatigue they carried into the race from a training standpoint. The single day would do damage and needs recovery, more than a week's recovery. But the real damage often occurs systemically from the accumulated fatigue that the training has done prior. For an older athlete, if it's a half Ironman, it's typically 10 to 14 days of really low stress training, moving back into regular training, maybe 10 or 14 days. With half Ironman athletes of regular age, let's call it 55 and lower, I tend to have them building into the first hard work of with real intention the weekend following, because I like them to go into races fresh and not accumulated fatigue. So that's a barometer for it.
Awesome. And then the next one we've got is from Noelle, who's she's a nurse. She works every other weekend. And so she has a difficult time getting in both like a long ride and a long run every week, like you traditionally see in many training programs. So with the understanding that you encourage multiple shorter run sessions to increase tissue resilience, how often should she try to get in a long run? Is every like 2 weeks sufficient, or how important is it to really get in that long run within the context of her schedule?
Well, firstly, Noelle, you don't need to get in every long ride, a long run every week, period. I would never prescribe that, as I talked about in the presentation. And the long run, typically I have athletes, depends on what we define as a long run. Let's call it for an Ironman 2 hours or above that. That's and earlier in the season, 90 minutes or more going up. Every third, within a 3-week cycle, there's one of them. But we might have multiple sessions that are 60 to 80 minutes over the course of that. So if you are embracing a long run every other week is more than adequate. I think that you should evolve to greater frequency. And then the same with a long ride. If a week that you're working, you're not going to have a long ride, and that's okay. And you might just do a slightly higher intensity trainer workout. You might have more frequent trainer workouts. And then you might have a longer ride on that week off, and maybe a little bit of a simulator or a double trainer ride on the third week sort of thing. So if it's an every other week cycle, that's great. I don't know any time-starved athlete that can ride long every week and run long every week and be successful in the image that we painted today in the fabric of what we talked about. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be riding long every week and running long every week. Shouldn't, or likely shouldn't, let's call it.
All right. And then final one, hopefully this will be a quick question. Looks like Rob had asked, is there a minimal amount of sleep when training for an Ironman? And maybe you can expand that to just touch again on sleep and recovery in general.
Yeah, I think that it's sleep is an individual thing, hormonally and genetically. And some of us are morning larks, some of us are night owls. And so there are two components of sleep that are really important: duration, and some of that is genetic, but there isn't an athlete alive that shouldn't be sleeping certainly more than 6 hours, probably more than 7 hours every night. But the second one is sleep quality, and you can set that up with not having screens in the last 30 to 40 minutes, having a really dark and cool environment to sleep in. So the quality of your sleep becomes important. It's also going to be like training sessions. You're going to have days of really bad or nights of really bad sleep where you feel like you're awake a lot. Others that you have tremendous sleep and you sleep for maybe more hours than typical, and it's really high quality sleep. But over the course of many, many weeks and many, many months, I would say for me, it tends to be, hey, I need 7.5 plus. For my wife, Kelly, it's 8 to 9 hours. Actually, for other people that I work with consistently, it's 6 to 7 hours. But yes, it's let's call it 7 hours as a baseline, just to make it quick and dirty.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up. There. And for those of you who we didn't get answers to your questions, please reach out to us, info@purplepatchfitness.com, and we'll make sure that we connect with you and get those answered. And I will turn it back over to Matt to wrap things up for the evening.
Sure. Actually, I'm going to add one thing to the initial question around knowing when to push through. I think I should just add this as a last thing, which is data. A lot of people use Whoop bands or Garmin watches or Oura rings, etc. All of that stuff can be useful within context. That stuff is never going to deliver the answer of pushing through, but it can give you some context. So if you do like tracking and having those discussions or having that observation and data, that's a really useful tool in your toolbox. But the honest thing, the most important thing is when you first wake up in the morning, the best thing that you can do before you look at that data is, how do I feel today? How do I feel? And reflect that, and then go through the process. And that's where we talk about anticipated and unanticipated. And then you can use data to validate or help you think through the process. I did want to mention that because I think that that's valuable and it's a part of our life. I am not overly interested, but I have one of those Oura rings because I feel like it's important for me to know. And I think it's interesting, but I've never made a decision around training or life based on this only. Like, it's never told me the answer, but it has provided perspective and also some interesting trends. So anyway, I just thought I would mention that as an end. Globally, firstly, thank you very much, Tiger, for being here in support of me. Thank you, everyone in the audience. I really appreciate it. As Tiger said, please reach out. We do these sessions to try and help coaches and athletes, be a source of information. This is a particular passion of helping time-starved athletes. And if you want to set up and have any of the questions that we missed tonight, feel free to email us. You're absolutely free, and we will make sure we respond. If you want to set up a call, talk about training, absolutely happy to do that as well. Whether you're a coach, whether you're coached, whether you're an athlete looking for increased performance, and most importantly, best of luck for the rest of this year. Go and have fun. And I want to see elevated levels of performance because people are showing up fit and fresh. And with that, I'll say take care and goodbye. See you next time, guys. Take care.